Right, it's time now for Focus. One of the measures France took in 2015 to combat the rise of radical Islam was to strike a deal with Morocco on the training of imams. The idea being to promote a moderate form of Islam, one that conforms to France's republican ideals. So, how is it working? Well, in this report, we follow two of the programme students from their hometown of Lens in northern France to an imam training school in Morocco's capital, Rabat.
Morgan Gallet converted to Islam 10 years ago.
The conversion is a real-life love story, a love story with God. It's something that's very intimate.
In his 30s, he lives in Lens, in the north of France. Every Friday, he heads to the local mosque for the day of prayer. Morgan plans on preaching here one day too. He recently quit his job as a salesman to pursue studies to become an imam, a recent career change for the young man, born from the attacks on France back in 2015, committed in the name of Islam.
It's certainly one of the events which moved me to follow this training program. We understand that questions have been raised. There are some people who may be sincere at the beginning, wanting to become closer to God, but that they fall in with bad people who manage to persuade them to commit atrocities.
His training takes place in Morocco. Mohamed El-Wassi has also been following the course. Both have been encouraged by the mosque's directors.
We're proud of you, we're so proud.
Mohamed El-Wassi is French-Moroccan. He, too, is convinced that Islam in France needs guidelines, so he chose to go and improve his theological knowledge. He wants to become a teacher and a prison chaplain upon his return.
Terrorism is not a religion, it's an ideology. So it can't be fought with weapons and armies. Rather, we need ideas, science, lots of different things. We need to show young people that that is the true face of Islam. Because the others, the extremists, have been stealing away our religion, presenting it in their own way, and we can't accept that.
Morocco has also had to deal with an onslaught of religious extremism. To counter it, the country's king founded this imam training course, open to nationals and foreigners. Mohamed and Morgan's studies are thanks in part to a partnership between France and this school. But it's Morocco who pays the two students' bursaries of €200 every month. Around 60 French students learn Arabic here. In this class, they learn the Quran. Helped by their teachers, they chant the verses of this text, a work of poetry and philosophy that they'll have to know by heart.
One of the objectives of teaching the Quran is not just knowing how to recite all its rules out loud in a beautiful voice, but it's also, and especially when we do recite it, meditating on these verses.
Morgan has 3 years of studies ahead of him to become an imam. Once back in France, he'll lead the prayer in Arabic and preach in French.
The imam's role is not just to focus on the 5 prayers. No, it's also to teach, and clearly I think that there's work to be done there in France.
This morning, Mohammed has a lesson with a teacher in Islamic logic, the interpretation of the Quran.
Faith, prayer, charity, Ramadan, and pilgrimage if you can afford it. These are the pillars of Islam.
The Institute advocates an Islam of sharing, respect and peace. It's according to this doctrine that the Quran is interpreted here.
Jihad is the struggle of the mind. It's one's own self-combat. The translation of the word jihad is struggling. It's the struggle that you must do for yourself as well as to help others.
For Mohammed, this form of Islam is universal and should be taught everywhere.
France needs French imams who understand the French mindset, who have studied French culture, who understand the laws of the Republic and secularism.
It's here in Morocco where Morgan can get to grips with the theological culture he'll need when he becomes an imam, to provide answers to questions from the French Muslim community.
Liberty, equality, fraternity. These topics are found time after time in the Quran and in the tradition of the Prophet. The ability to live together is an important cornerstone of Islam. What's certain is that there is not any opposition between living one's faith, being Muslim, living one's religion in an accomplished way, and living in France.
Morgan and Mohammed will soon be returning to France to start preaching, but they're still very much a minority within French mosques. The majority of them must still look to overseas in order to recruit their imams.
Now, for more on this, I'm now joined by Youssef Bilal, a political scientist and sociologist at the University of Rabat. Hello, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, when is it that Morocco started positioning itself as the champion of moderate Islam?
Look, it's interesting because Morocco has been known the last few years as one of the countries where countries like France were outsourcing the construction of the cars, or other countries, the companies, the construction of aircraft. Now it's interesting that France is outsourcing also the teaching of Islam, the basic teachings of Islam. It's a very interesting change. In ways that Morocco has a long tradition, has important assets, as a very long tradition of Islamic knowledge. As you know, Al-Qarawiyyin, which is the university located in Fes, is considered as one of the first universities founded in the 9th century. So Morocco is also very well respected as a center of knowledge, which is known as the Islam of the middle path or the middle ground. That is neither extremism or literal understanding of the text of Islam, nor a complete adherence or acceptance of secularism or modernity. So it's an attempt to reconcile between tradition and modernity. And Morocco is also in a position of proximity to France and Europe. And we have seen also that a lot of countries, not only in Europe, but also in Africa and recently Mali, who asked Morocco to train their imam. So I think there is a good case here, and also related to the nature of the teachings in this institute.
So you think then that by sending imams to be trained in Morocco, France is taking a positive step towards combating radical Islam?
Yes, it's under the assumption that because there is an ignorance of Islam, there is a bad, not a good knowledge of the text, that anyone can, take a sentence or a verse from the Quran and say this is its meaning. We saw it in a few minutes ago. What's the real meaning of jihad, which is often translated as the holy war, but in fact is the internal struggle. How you can be good, how can you be spiritual, and how you can help others. One of the challenges is how this Islam that is taught in Morocco, in a Muslim majority country, where the head of state is also the commandant of the faithful, can be adapted to the French context, to secularism, or to the French laïcité. So these are one of the most important challenges. But precisely what is important here is that Morocco is trusted by France, probably more than Algeria or Tunis, for the reasons that I mentioned, that make it really the right place where you can outsource these teachings. Now, the idea is also for France that you are here now in a transition, and it cannot be only outsourced, because Islam now is part of French identity. So at a certain point, France will also need to own these teachings and provide the teaching of Islam and it is difficult in the secular context in the history of France as regards religion.
Apart from the issue of teaching Islam, what else do you think France needs to do to counter more extreme forms of Islam, like Wahhabism?
Look, we are here under the assumption that ignorance and the bad knowledge of the text is not or prepares the ground or lays the ground for young people to be violent. Now, there are other issues. It's not only about the teachings of Islam. Of course, it is an important aspect of it. But what is most important is the social economic condition of the Muslim community in France, the access to jobs, the access to education, the feeling that you are not the target of racism or being excluded from French society, and the most important, the big narrative of French history, of French identity, that Islam now is part of French identity. It's no longer something that belongs to the other, or belongs to the enemy, or someone who is not part of France, and okay. This applies to Europe.
All right, I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Youssef Bilal, for joining us for today's Focus.